So we're here with Laruga, and she's going to show us a little bit about Urdhva Dhanurasana and maybe some of the modifications and how to work a little bit deeper if you're able to do so. And here she is.
Okay, so we're just going to go through a few techniques to work Urdhva Dhanurasana with more ease, so we can distribute the energy and the opening more throughout the back, the chest, and the shoulders. So first we'll just start laying down. So before even lifting up into the position, the first thing that you want to bring your attention to is to lengthen through the small of the back, through the low back. So not scooping too much, but not keeping a big arch, but just moving the tailbone or pointing the tailbone slightly toward the heels so there's more length through the low back. And then from here, placing the palms over the shoulders. And then before I even think about lifting my head to the floor, I just lift the pelvis first. And then I feel a softening through my inner thighs and releasing the glutes. And then also toning the pelvic floor and toning my lower belly. And then from here, I'm going to lift off to bring the top of my head to the mat. And this is an important part here. So we want to plug the shoulders into the back. So moving the shoulders into the shoulder joint instead of lifting off with the shoulders off the back. So it's very common that many people will lift from this position, but first we want to plug the shoulders in so they support the opening through the chest, and then from here, lifting off. When in the position, it's important to release the glutes and allow the inner thighs to soften. And then coming down to the top of the head, and then coming all the way down. So the important part is when you're in this position with the top of the head on the floor, you want to plug the shoulders in so you get a more support through and a more support through the chest and a deeper opening through the shoulders.
And is there an ideal placement of the hands? I looked at your hands and they were, I mean, relative to your shoulders, I suppose, they're about in line with your shoulders, but yeah. I'm just thinking of mine on the mat. They're almost not hanging off the mat, but quite close to the edge of the mat. Is there a tendency to want to do that if you're a bit stiffer in the shoulder?
Yeah, most definitely. I think going a little bit wider, if you're a little bit tighter, is good. Obviously for men, you're going to, if you go shoulder width apart, it's going to be quite a bit wider.
Yeah.
But I also, for some tighter students, especially when they're male, also for the feet, I find that the feet should be shoulder width apart too.
Right. That's
quite helpful instead of trying to stay hip width apart.
Too narrow.
So there's a nice base through the feet and through the hands to be able to lift off.
And what about the spacing of the hands from the hips when you first lay down, you settle your feet? A lot of people some people bring the heels right to their bum, and some people leave it a little bit.
Yeah, I think close is good. Maybe not too close. I think that really depends on the person. But I think fairly close touching, but not too close, where it's like you're kind of jamming the heels into the glutes.
Yeah.
That would be too much.
Because it's going to make it a tighter.
Exactly. Yeah.
And for people that are having trouble straightening their arms, whether it's restriction at the hip end or the shoulder end, is there any way we can work with that as far as making it a little bit easier or more comfortable?
I tend to, when students are having trouble with straightening their arms, I tend to come in and just help support. Okay. I know there's a lot of techniques with straps and things like that, but I've noticed that it takes kind of the same amount of time, like if you use a strap or if you're kind of guiding them along. Yeah. And I think it goes with that same thing of just going straight through the resistance. So it's okay for a time if someone's not fully extended. But I like to come and give students support and give them adjustment to kind of get more of a lift and more of a straightening through the arms.
And for those people that are maybe at home working on their own, and they've still got their elbows coming out, is there a good shoulder opener that they could do prior to doing their back bends, or do you think that it's better just to do them?
Well, I always think it's important to do the pose, but there's definitely quite a few shoulder openers that students can work through.
Is there something they could do without straps and blocks and all this business? Or would it be easy to do just prior to the asana?
Well, when it comes, we can go through a few shoulder openers, but I think when it comes to straps, I don't know if people are familiar with the straps that have elastic in them.
No.
I actually have a few of these, and I think that I find that that's better because it has a little bit of give and it's more real life. Instead of having a strap that you're pushing against.
Yes, so it gives you unreal support.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've come across some straps that are made out of elastic. So there's still some room to kind of, you get support, but there's still some movement happening. So essentially the student still has to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And can you show us a shoulder opener that doesn't involve
any straps?
Straps and blocks?
Sure.
That we could do as a prep?
Okay, so one of my favorite shoulder openers is, and it might not be so easy for everyone, but taking one arm out like this, and then you reach behind and you grab the upper arm, and you're using this straight arm as a weight. So it'll be a dead weight, and it's pulling on the opposite arm. And then you want to keep the head and chest up. And sometimes you don't feel the stretch right away, so you continue to allow the straight arm to be dead weight, like so. And it's very opening through the shoulder joint.
Yeah, that looks nice.
Like so. Now for some students that are a little bit tighter, it might look like this at first. So over time, as they get more movement and more opening, this arm will start to lower down.
And you're trying to keep your head back, not letting it push you forwards.
Right, so this wouldn't be so good. So just keeping the chin lifted, and also maybe pushing the head slightly back on the arm.
Nice. Like
so. And I find this one really good, so it hurts so good. I really like this one. And then switching sides, holding, below the elbow joint.
Yeah.
Like so. Keeping the head and chest lifted. And just allowing the straight arm here to be dead weight.
And are you pulling that straight arm towards the ground, or is it just heavy? Just heavy. Just heavy.
Yeah, so not trying to, allowing gravity to just allow the opening. So no pulling.
Okay.
It's not really necessary. And it'll actually do the work. And the more you hold, the more you'll feel gravity starts to work.
Right. Mm-hmm. And going back to the Urdhva Dhanurasana itself, some people suggest when you've got tighter shoulders to maybe turn the hands out a little bit. Do you find that is effective, or do you find that later on it comes back as a problem, or you would be better to work with the stricter stance?
I think personally that's okay. I think students have to be able to make it work and find some ease in the beginning, and then I think over time as the practice refines, then you try to refine the movement or the posture in itself. The only time I find problems with certain modifications when students don't want to graduate and move on to
they become attached to that way of doing it.
Yeah. So I think it's totally okay to experiment with things to make it a little bit more accessible, and then moving and graduating on to the next step. So.
And hip end and foot end, obviously we see a lot of people with their feet turned out as they push up. Mm-hmm. What sort of leeway do you think is acceptable on that? Because it sort of distorts the pelvis and the sacrum a bit, doesn't it? If they go
exactly.
Out too
far. So when you start to pull the feet out too much, you can start crunching in the low back.
Yeah.
I think a little bit is okay in the beginning. Again, students need to be able to make the shape of the pose in the best way they can without essentially hurting themselves.
Yeah.
But I tend to be quite strict with that. Over time, I really want students to start to pull their feet in parallel. And then I'll also kind of manipulate a little bit, just causing their inner thighs to feel heavy and pull down toward the floor.
Yeah.
But not moving their knees so much, but just more the flesh, to just so they can feel the sense of the inner thighs melting down.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I tend to, my spine really wants to bend in the lumbar region. So when I do that, it really helps with that compression in the back.
That's good, because when you see people doing Urdhva Dhanurasana, some people can be very high, but when you look at them, they're hinging at sort of T12, L1, the bottom of the rib cage.
Exactly.
And they find it really hard to not do that, because they have that movement available, and you might say, well, it's not particularly healthy to be doing that. Can you come a little bit lower? But they have trouble stabilizing that area. What would be your recommendations to sort of try and create not so much give in that particular bit?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's something that I struggle with sometimes, because I have that, like, I really want to bend in a few certain areas.
Yeah.
This tip that I showed about plugging the shoulders in really helped, just to distribute more of the opening throughout. So I noticed that once my shoulders started to integrate into my back, it just gave me a little bit extra space. And then going back with the inner thighs dropping, and also really thinking of this lengthening through the sides of the waist, toning the low belly. It doesn't have to be aggressive, and also lengthening through my low back before I even lift up, just so I'm not coming in already kind of arched too much, just getting a little bit more of a lengthening there. And that's really helped. And sometimes I tell students, you want to act like, before you go up, you want to act like you're trying to put on a pair of jeans that are too small. You know, and you're kind of like trying to just pull in. It doesn't have to be too much, but just pulling and lengthening in through the sides of the waist.
Before you start to lift.
Yes.
And what about juggling the hands around once you're up? You know, so you're placing your hands and then you're pressing up.
Yes.
I sometimes feel if you start juggling things around, then you lose that integration that you've created at the shoulder or wherever. Is it better to sort of place them and not move them, or?
So, yeah, not so much when you start. I think you should kind of stay in that position for the first few. You can come, but also you can come down to the top of the head and walk your hands in. Stay planted and then press up. Then I think after you've done maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe in a row, then it's okay. I feel you should feel open enough if it's available to you to then walk in from the air.
From there.
Yeah, if it's available, if you feel
that it's there.
Yeah.
And is it worth, because it can be quite challenging when you begin to just come down to the head and then go back up again. But is it worth confronting that difficulty? Because there's a tendency to want to come down and have a nice little rest and then start again from fresh to go back up again.
So I can see for beginner students that would be difficult. So there's a sense of trying to build that endurance. So I think it's okay to come back down flat. But over time, I really start to challenge students to stay on the top of the head and to press back up continuously. But then I'm not pushing them to get there like right away.
No.
But I tend to feel like that's a good endurance builder. Also, when you come to the top of the head, you're still maintaining a little bit of an arch. So I feel like you're not kind of going into an arch and then flat, arch, flat. So when you stay in a little bit of an arch, you're maintaining that opening, and it really should start to feel easier if the strength is there. So I find that really valuable to do them in concession like that.
Nice. That's great. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.